The bailiff's door hissed, and cold air spilled over the back of my neck like river water. I stepped into Portsmouth Family Court in full dress uniform, wool tight at the shoulders, shoes bright enough to argue with the fluorescent lights. My silver star lay flat against my ribs, a weight I knew better than my own name. The flag behind the bench hung perfectly still, creased like a held breath. Dad laughed first, too loud, metal on tile. "Costume day?" he said, turning so the gallery could hear. Mom shook her head, small and practiced, as if disappointment were a habit that kept her warm. The sound of his chuckle bounced against the paneled walls, then died in the carpet like a bad joke that found its manners too late. Judge Harold Simmons looked up, and for a blink, the courtroom lost its bureaucratic heartbeat. Recognition crossed his face the way weather moves across a field. Quiet, complete. He took me in the way pilots read windsocks. One glance, everything said. The clerk stopped typing. Somewhere in the hall, a coffee lid clicked into place. Inside, the room remembered how to be silent. I set my cover on the table and smoothed the summons with a gloved palm. Sawyer v. Sawyer. Abandonment of property. My name looked strange next to the accusation. 12 years since I'd walked away from the family business and into a ranger shoot. 12 years since the porch fights about traitors and real work. 12 years since the only hand at my back had been my grandfather's, the one that didn't shake. The bench creaked when I sat. Leather, old paper, lemon cleaner. I could smell the starch in my sleeves. My grandfather's compass was in my pocket. A circle of scratched brass, arrow steady as breath, knocking gently against my thigh with each shift. Tap. Tap. As if to say, true north hasn't moved just because they have. Dad leaned toward his lawyer, whispering like a man who wanted the whole room to overhear. "Told you she'd play soldier. Courts love a show." He grinned at me. The grin had never learned when to stand down. I looked at the stack I'd carried from the farmhouse. Tax receipts printed from an army account that had kept the land honest when my family wouldn't. The will in my grandfather's looping hand, ceding the house and fields, to the one who will still rise before the frost and do the right thing. Photocopies of checks that smelled faintly of toner and resolve. And on top, folded and worn where I had unfolded it 100 times, the condolence letter from Chris Lewis's mother, the day we buried my best friend under a flag that behaved in wind better than any of us did. "Case on," the clerk said, voice like a bell. I stood. The uniform did what uniforms do. It held my spine until it remembered itself. The judge's eyes flicked to my rack, then to my face, then to the compass bump in my pocket like he could see the shape of steadiness through the wool. "Ms. Sawyer," he said, the Ms., chosen clean. "You may be seated unless you prefer to stand." "I'll stand, Your Honor," I said, because my legs knew parade rest when dignity asked. Dad snorted. "Always performing," he muttered. The gallery pivoted like a flock. The flag didn't move. I heard boots and sand, the old ghost of the Yemen extraction that still lived behind my ribs, the rotor wash turning hot air into a hand you could push against, the cry of a child lifted over a stone wall, the hiss of a radio when the line finally clicked and a voice said, "Confirmed. They're out." That desert heat found the cold air of the courtroom and didn't know what to do with it. I breathed once, deep enough to anchor both. "Counsel?" Judge Simmons asked. Dad's lawyer rose, smile quick and polished, the kind that chips the teeth it hides. "Your Honor, Ms. Sawyer abandoned the property. My clients, William and Mary Sawyer, seek restoration of familial rights and relief." "Paid the taxes from deployment pay," I said, not forcing it. "Kept the roof from sagging. Fenced the north pasture last fall with my own hands." I set a receipt on the table, the paper's edge aligned with the wood grain. This isn't abandonment. It's stewardship. The judge watched the page slide like he was tracking wind drift. His jaw set in a way that told me he knew exactly what gravity could do to people who stopped respecting it. Dad laughed again, softer now, but still the wrong volume for rooms with flags. "Playing soldier in court. You always wanted attention, Jordan." The compass knocked once, sharp enough to count. "Tap." Judge Simmons lifted a finger. "Mr. Sawyer," he said, voice level, "you will refrain from editorial." The room learned new quiet. The air between us cooled by 10 degrees. Mom's eyes flicked to my shoulder patch and then back to her lap, where her fingers twisted a tissue the size of a field dressing. I found the judge's gaze and held it like a landing in crosswind. I joined to protect, not abandon, I said. No rhetoric, just the sentence I'd earned the right to say. His mouth didn't smile, but something in the lines softened, the way hard ground does after a first rain. We'll hear evidence, he said. And Ms. Sawyer, thank you for your service. Dad exhaled a noise that wanted to be a scoff and died somewhere around the flag. The clerk's keys started again, and the white noise of a courthouse morning resumed. The compass settled again against my thigh. Tap, tap, as if reminding me that every room has a north, even when people get lost. I looked down at the silver star, then at the will with my grandfather's careful penmanship, then back up at the bench. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a map, and I knew how to read both. Read. Proceed, the judge said. I did. I grew up in a house where work sounded like belts squealing and men shouting over drill presses. The family business made fittings and brackets. Pride smelled like cutting oil and hot metal. Dad said a paycheck wasn't real unless your palms stung on Friday. Mom counted invoices at the kitchen table and called my plans phases the way weather passes over a field without asking the wheat what it wants. I wanted wind. Not the kind that rattles a bay door, but the kind that rolls over a ridgeline and tells you what the next 5 minutes require. The first time I said Army, Dad laughed like the word bounced. Traitor to the shop, he said. A joke that never learned where to stop. He meant it to land soft. It didn't. The flag on our porch faded one summer to a polite pink, and no one noticed except me and Grandpa James. He replaced it at dawn, alone, hands careful on the halyard, like he was knotting a tie for a ceremony. Grandpa was the only one who understood that a uniform is not a costume. It's a spine you step into. He kept an old brass compass on the mantle, face scratched to fog, needle steady as breath. North doesn't bargain, he told me, pressing it into my palm the day I signed. Neither should you. The metal's chill held while the house warmed with indignation. Mom smoothed napkins. Dad reminded me the line would outlast any mission. Grandpa walked me to the truck in silence and tapped the compass twice, tap, tap, like permission to proceed. Basic tasted like dust and salt. Ranger school smelled like wet rope and stubbornness. I learned how to read a ridgeline by thumb, how to measure a room by breath, how to carry a man who couldn't carry himself. My dress uniform hung silent in a wall locker most of those years. The desert doesn't care for wool. When I wore it, the collar sat like a rule I respected. The flag over the stage didn't stir. The air remembered our names anyway. Yemen rewrote the inside of my ears. Heat rose off the stones at midnight and made the radio hiss like a snake trying to become language. We pulled a family through a wall one at a time. Hands on shoulders, shoulders under weight into a waiting truck that would be gone if we were slow. Rotor wash turned grit to weather. I saw a child's face under a soot smear and watched fear exit the small muscles first. Jaw, knuckles, eyelids. Someone recorded a clip that made its way to a stateside newscast, a 30-second loop that compressed 12 hours into applause. We were already gone by the time the video grew its own story. Ellison's name lived in our debrief notes, not in the headlines. The only line I held onto was my friend Chris's laugh when the wheels finally kissed the strip. Boring is beautiful. His funeral smelled like damp suits and hymnals older than the congregation. The flag over his casket behaved the way fabric does when it knows it's being watched. Creases sharp, corners taut. His mother slipped me a letter at the graveside. You kept your promise when it counted. I folded it small, square as a rank, and kept it with the compass. Tap, tap. When Grandpa died, the farmhouse felt too quiet for a week, then too loud. The will arrived in paper that tried to smell important. He left the house in the back 40 to the one who will still rise before the frost and do the right thing. Dad called it sentimental. Mom called it complicated. I called the county and changed the tax address to my APO. Every April, while a sandstorm made the world taste like pennies, I paid the bill from an account that had dirt under its cuticles, even if my hands didn't. When leave lined up with seasons, I mended fence alone. The pasture grass made a low, dry sound when it forgave my boots. I oiled hinges, patched shingles, and stored receipts in plastic sleeves that went into a binder labeled House in block letters. North doesn't bargain. Paper doesn't either. I didn't go home for holidays. The shop clock would still click. The jokes would still try to be knives and fail upward. Mom texted photos of pies and wish you were here in neutral font. Dad sent nothing or an article about the factory's output like a man mailing proof. The farmhouse kept its own calendar. Peonies up in late May, the pump squealing in August, mice audacious by October. I left fresh flags folded in their boxes for the volunteer who swapped them at the cemetery. I sent a note with each one. For whoever's next. Grandpa would have liked that system. No speeches, just inventory. The Navy chest in my bedroom, funny name for an army house, held the truer ledger. Dress blues folded tight, medals boxed in velvet that smelled like dry theater. Chris's mother's letter, creased where thumbs had leaned. Grandpa's compass asleep on flannel, its face nicked into a constellation only my pocket knew. When the summons came, Sawyer v. your Sawyer, I opened the lid and let the cool air from the cedar slap my wrists. Abandonment. My name looked unconvincing under the accusation. I slid the tax receipts into a fresh sleeve, smoothed the will's crease with a thumbnail, and set the silver star on top for a minute, not for decoration, just for reminder. Some rooms require certain weights. Dad's lawyer filed the petition in language that tried to be sauced and came out thin. The grounds were abandonment. The facts were address lines and gossip. I ran my finger over the house deed, Grandpa's pen curves steady as a river on a map, and let the compass knock my knuckle. Tap. When the county clerk answered my call with, "Ma'am, you've never missed a payment," I wrote the sentence on an index card and slid it into the binder. Useful words deserve a tab. I wore the uniform on purpose, not to perform, to declare jurisdiction. Over my posture, my breath, my claim on a piece of ground that had outlasted every family temper. The morning of court, the farmhouse smelled like coffee and oiled leather. I ran a rag over the porch rail the way Grandpa used to. Small circles, wood warming under cloth. The flag on the front beam hung unbothered in windless air. Its stillness matched the hallway I was walking into. On my way out, I pocketed the compass. It knocked my thigh once, tap. Then again, when I locked the door, tap. The house accepted the click without commentary. The binder felt right in my left hand. The cover's edge pressed a groove into my palm that reminded me to keep my answers short. I drove to Portsmouth with the radio off and the window cracked an inch. The world smelled like Tide mud and courthouse paper. In the garage elevator, someone's cologne tried to dominate the air and failed. I thought of Grandpa in a Sunday suit, resetting the porch flag at dawn because the crease had loosened. He would have laughed at the idea of me in a courtroom and then taken my elbow at the door anyway. Outside courtroom B, the hallway held its own silence, the kind that has seen too many families try to win. I breathed once and felt the wool at my shoulders hold me up. When the bailiff opened the door, the flag behind the bench didn't move. North stayed where it has always been. The summons lay ready in my bag, the compass pressed against my leg like a small, polite witness. The next knock I heard would be the gavel, or the sound a joke makes when it finally realizes it's out of place. Either way, I was done whispering. The clerk called the case. Paper rustled like a small storm, the flag didn't move. I set my binder on the table, tabs squared, edges flush, and felt the compass nudge my thigh. Tap. Dad's lawyer rose with a smile honed on billable hours. Abandonment, he said crisp. My clients were forced to rescue the family homestead. By suing me, I said evenly. He lifted a page. 12 years gone, Your Honor. No presents, no care. I slid the first sleeve forward. Tax receipts, 12 years paid, he blinked. From where? Combat pay, I said, and Chow Hall coffee. Mom stared at her lap, thumbs worrying a tissue to lace. Dad leaned back satisfied. She left, he muttered. I served, I answered. Different verbs. The judge steepled his fingers. We'll see the will. I placed Grandpa's handwriting on the rail. The ink had that old iron smell. The loops stood like fence posts. To the one who will still rise before frost and do the right thing, Dad's lawyer tried to smirk. Poetry doesn't bind title. Probated, I said, and put the order on top. The clerk's keys paused, then resumed. Credence awarded. Mini-turn, the lawyer sprang the photo. My rucksack on the farmhouse porch, door locked, nobody in frame. Abandonment, he crowed. Months empty. I looked at the date stamp. January, training cycle. I tapped the tax line. Paid that week. He rifled, found volume. Ungrateful. She rejected the family business. I breathed once. The wool at my shoulders held me up. I rejected contempt. Dad laughed, softer than before, still wrong. Playing soldier. Judge Simmons leaned forward, eyes narrowing by degrees. Ms. Sawyer, step to the witness box. His voice carried the kind of authority that makes a room find its spine. I swore in. The wood smelled like lemon oil and old arguments. State your name and service. Jordan Marie Sawyer, United States Army, 275, Ranger. The syllables settled like good weight. The judge studied my rack without blinking. Silver Star? I nodded. Yemen evacuation, sir. Something changed in his face. Recognition like a match struck in windless air. He glanced to the clerk. She found the same memory you keep on a shelf and dust sometimes. The footage, he said mostly to himself. Stone alleys, night rotor wash. Dad's lawyer waved it off. Irrelevant heroics. The judge's gaze cut clean. Counsel, relevance is mine. Silence took a seat and refused to leave. I felt the compass knock again, tap, tap, steadying the rhythm of my breath. Ms. Sawyer, the judge said, voice gentler, why wear the uniform today? It tells the truth faster, I said. I serve. I paid. I kept the land. Dad's lawyer scowled. She wants a parade. I want your honor, I said, to read the ledger. The judge gestured. I handed up the binder. Sleeves whispered. Receipts lined up like fence pickets. A photo of the north pasture I'd re-fenced last fall. Frost still white on the wire, my glove prints in the post-pounder's handle. He took his time. The room listened. Mom finally looked up. Her mouth opened, then closed, as if a word had found her and wasn't ready to be born. Mini turn. The lawyer lunged at a new angle. She abandoned the family, that's our claim. Judge Simmons didn't look at him. He looked at my compass bulge as if he could see through wool to brass. Families abandon. Land remembers. He set the binder down, centered it with 2 fingers. Counsel, unless you have evidence contrary to these payments, we're done with that fiction. Dad's jaw worked. She's a traitor to the shop. I met his eyes. I kept Grandpa's promise. He shot back, smaller. You left. I answered, quiet. To protect. Not to abandon. The judge tapped his gavel once. Wood on wood, not loud, decisive. Court will take notice of Ms. Sawyer's service and verified stewardship. We proceed on law, not noise. Dad's lawyer tried one last jab. She plays dress up. The judge's head turned a degree. Counsel, enough. Then, to me, warmer. Ms. Sawyer, you may return to counsel table. Leave the binder. I stepped down. The compass nudged, tap, and settled. My silver star lay cool against ribbon bone. I felt Chris's mother's letter like a folded breath in the pocket behind it. The flag above the bench held its crease as if waiting for a wind it trusted. On the way back to my chair, I passed Dad. He muttered, "You think you're better." I stopped, turned just enough. I think I owe the truth. His mouth shut. The room stayed quiet, the useful kind. Judge Simmons lifted the will again, thumb on Grandpa's name. We will reconvene after lunch. Counsel, review your facts. His gaze moved from my parents to me and back. And reconsider your tone. Gavel. One clean knock. The clerk called the recess. People stood out of habit. A few stayed standing a second longer, stand without ceremony. The bailiff opened the side door, cool air drafted in, smelled faintly of rain. I put my hand in my pocket and touched the compass. North hadn't moved, neither would I. After lunch, the courtroom smelled like coffee burned down to honesty. Fluorescence buzzed a thin halo over the seal. I slid my gloves into my cover, squared the binder, and felt the compass nudge my thigh. Tap! The flag above the bench held its crease like a rule that didn't need to prove itself. Dad's lawyer opened with a smile meant for cameras we didn't have. Ms. Sawyer, you left for 12 years. I served 12, I said. Family abandoned? Protected, I said. Paid, repaired. He paced a slow rectangle. You wanted distance. I wanted duty, I answered. He flicked a photo onto the rail. Winter porch, my ruck against the door. Empty house. February, I said. Fence repair scheduled. Taxes paid that week. He leaned in. You enjoyed the uniform. I kept my voice level. I respected it. He tried a sharper angle. You're ungrateful. I breathed once. The wool at my shoulders reminded my spine. I'm responsible. Mini turn. He scooped a second photo, my grandfather's compass on the farmhouse table, light catching the scratched brass. A prop, he said. An heirloom, I said. A direction. Dad snorted. Costume and toys. Judge Simmons didn't look up from the ledger. Mr. Sawyer. Dad's jaw clicked shut. The room welcomed the quiet like shade in August. The lawyer pivoted to tone. You refused the family business. I refused contempt, I said. Big difference. He spread his hands. You left your mother. I glanced at her. She kept her eyes on the tissue torn thin between her fingers. I called, I said. No one answered. He smiled without warmth. And now you want the land. I want truth recorded, I said. The land came with it. He took a breath meant to become triumph. So, a ranger with a farm. A daughter with a promise, and I said. The judge tapped his pen, small metronome. Counsel, evidence. The lawyer's grin thinned. He flipped a page. Your Yemen narrative, irrelevant. Judge Simmons lifted his head a degree. I decide relevance. A murmur crept along the benches and then remembered how to behave. The clerk's fingers hovered over her keyboard, then moved faster, as if memory had found keys it liked. I slid one more sleeve forward. Photographs of the north fence line, frost glittering on new wire, boot marks where the post pounder had bruised the dirt. I rose before the frost, I said. He asked me to. I touched my grandfather's signature with one finger. The paper felt cool and exact. The lawyer peered down. Weeds, he said. Hey, I said. Cut after first rain. He angled his chin toward the bench. She plays soldier here. She plays honest, the judge said, almost to himself. He lifted the binder, turned 2 pages, and let them fall back into alignment with the pad of his thumb. Mini turn. The clerk stood, cheeks pink. Your Honor, she said, voice careful. I located the Yemen citation. She held out a sheet. The seal glinted under fluorescent patience. U.S. Army Silver Star, Staff Sergeant Jordan M. Sawyer, for gallantry in evacuating civilians under fire. The air changed. A subtle drop in temperature when a cloud covers sun. The lawyer's expression faltered. Dad shifted, chair legs rasping a small apology into tile. Judge Simmons read the first line silently, then aloud with no embroidery, just nouns and verbs pushed into place. The court takes judicial notice, he said. He glanced at me. His voice dropped half an octave. You were there. Yes, Your Honor, I said. What did you do? He asked. 4 words, not a performance. Followed orders, I said. Carried people, didn't leave anyone. Dad's lawyer tried to revive his script. Grandstanding. The judge's gaze settled on him like a plumb bob. Counsel, enough. Mom lifted her head. Her mouth made a soft circle. I saw a younger kitchen in the shape of it. Steam, invoices, the clock ticking past compassion. She blinked and looked at me, not through me. You paid the taxes, she said, more to herself than anyone. Every year, I said. The lawyer tried one last cut. You refused to come home. I kept it standing, I said. To spite them, he pressed. To honor him, I said, nodding to the will. And to be ready. Ready for what? He snapped. For today, I said. The judge exhaled once, slow, the way men do when a decision settles. Counsel, you have no evidence of abandonment. You have a daughter who paid taxes, maintained property, and served her country. He angled the citation toward the light. And risked her life for strangers. Dad slumped back, heat drifting out of his posture. She thinks she's better. I think I owe truth, I said. He stared at the table's wood grain and found nothing to polish. Mini turn. A teenager in the back row, hoodie, backpack, hugged to chest, rose halfway, startled by his own legs. He sat again, but didn't bend. 2 older men followed, not in unison, not theatrical, just bodies finding the angle of respect. The bailiff didn't shush them. The room knew its boundary and kept it. Judge Simmons set the citation beside the will like 2 pieces of a map. The court acknowledges Ms. Sawyer's service and stewardship. We will hear closing statements. Keep them brief. Dad's lawyer shuffled his notes. The slick tiles of his voice lost their wax. My clients feel displaced. Feelings aren't title, the judge said. He turned to me. Mrs. Sawyer. I stood, wool rasping my shirt. The compass pressed my thigh. Tap. The flag kept its crease. I serve to protect, I said, not abandon. The judge nodded once, eyes on the ledger, then on me. Noted. He raised the gavel a fraction and paused as if listening to the room's breathing settle. We'll rule after a short recess. The gavel found wood, one clear knock. The courtroom didn't applaud. It aligned. Quiet, correct, a room remembering how to hold weight without dropping it. I touched the compass through the cloth, cool circle, steady needle, and felt the tiny tremor leave my hands. North hadn't moved. The truth had finally found its direction. The courtroom smelled like paper warmed under lights and the lemon oil that never quite masked old arguments. Fluorescence hummed a thin ceiling of sound. I felt the compass press my thigh, tap, like a small, insistent witness. Judge Simmons returned, robe brushing the rail, eyes steady. The flag above him held its crease like a rule. Be seated, he said, and then, glancing over the room, or stand if you must. Several people didn't sit. They didn't need the order. Dad's lawyer tried one last angle, voice polished to a shine. Your Honor, she left. She plays soldier, my clients. Counsel, the judge said, not loud. Evidence is done. Dad leaned forward, breath catching on the microphone. Court's not impressed by costumes, he said. I turned enough to face him. This isn't a costume, I said. It's the work. He snorted. Playing soldier. I held the rail, wood warm under palm. I serve to protect, I said, not abandon. The judge's gavel tapped once, measured, not scolding. Silence anchored itself to the carpet. He lifted the Silver Star citation and the will, set them side by side like coordinates. Ms. Sawyer, he said, eyes on me. The court recognizes your service and your stewardship. Payments verified, maintenance verified, title by will, probated and unchallenged. He turned to my parents, voice gentler than they deserved and better than they expected. Mr. and Mrs. Sawyer, disappointment is not a cause of action. He angled the citation toward the gallery. And this court will not call gallantry dress up. The clerk's keys stopped. The room paused. Even the vent seemed to hold breath. Dad stood, half rising on reflex. She betrayed the shop. Judge Simmons met him with the calm every room hopes for. She honored a promise. He raised the gavel, let it hover a beat. Petition denied. Property remains with Ms. Sawyer. Cost to petitioners. The gavel found wood, one clean strike that rang just enough. For a second, nothing moved. Then the sound changed. Not applause, not noise, bodies aligning. Stand moved through the benches like truth finding its feet. A veteran in a ball cap rose, a teenager followed. 2 bailiffs straightened because they already were. Dad's shoulders fell as if someone had removed a plank he leaned on. Mom pressed her tissue flat against her knee, then stood, too. Small, late, but up. The judge nodded toward me, not theatrical. Ms. Sawyer, he said, thank you. I felt the Silver Star cool against bone, the wool collar hold my neck the way discipline does. The compass nudged my thigh, tap, tap, like a direction clearing its throat. I spoke to the record, not the room. Honor's direction never changes, even when families do. Something unclenched across the gallery. The clerk's throat worked. The bailiff angled the door open. Rain scent drifted in, soft and metallic. Dad swallowed hard. "You think you won?" he muttered, but it landed without teeth. "I think the truth stood up," I said. Judge Simmons stacked the binder and the citation, slid them back with a thumb that squared edges. "Miss Sawyer, collect your documents. Counsel, confer with your clients about appeal deadlines, and reconsider your tone." He rapped the gavel once more, final, not cruel. I approached the rail. Paper sighed under my palm. A low, friendly sound. The will's ink smelled faintly of iron. Grandpa's handwriting steadied my eyes. I slipped the compass from my pocket, scratched brass warm now, and pressed it into my palm until the arrow found its rest. Minnie turn. As I turned to leave, the court reporter lifted her chin. She didn't speak. She simply stood a fraction straighter. Mom whispered, almost lost in the carpet. "You paid the taxes." I nodded. She blinked wet once, then twice, like a person learning a language she used to know. Dad stayed seated, jaw tight, hands spread on empty wood. "You wore a uniform to shame us," he said. "Last try." I stopped at his shoulder. "I wore it to tell the truth faster," I said. "You can catch up." He couldn't answer. The flag above the bench still didn't move. It didn't need to. It had a crease and a gravity in a room that finally understood both. Outside the door, the hallway air felt cooler, smelling of rain and ink. I tucked the binder under my arm and slid the compass back into my pocket. Tap. The needle settled. Ellison wasn't here, Yemen wasn't either, but the discipline that kept people alive had just kept a farmhouse honest. Behind me, the gavel's echo thinned into ordinary building noise. Footsteps, a copier lid, a cough. In front of me, a boy in a hoodie held the door and didn't meet my eyes. "Ma'am," he said, awkward and proud. I touched my cover and passed through. On the steps, damp air kissed the wool at my shoulders. The silver star lay quiet. The courthouse columns shed tiny beads of rain, and the town smelled like wet brick and second chances. I set my palm on the binder's spine and felt the day click into place like a bolt that finally met its threads. We weren't done, no family ever is, but the map had been corrected in public. North hadn't moved. The court had turned to face it. The farmhouse smelled like cut pine and primer. Rain had rinsed the dust off the windows, the porch screens breathed. I hung my uniform in the bedroom and pulled on work jeans, then set the binder on the kitchen table where sunlight could find the will without asking permission. The flag over the mantel kept its crease. Grandpa's brass compass sat on the sill, needle quiet as a held thought. Tap. My pocket missed the nudge and didn't need it. I started with the porch, new baluster, 2 screws sunk just shy of proud, a palm over the rail the way Grandpa taught me, feel for wobble, fix the truth. The pump squealed twice, then settled. Out back, frost-burned grass gave under my boots with that low, forgiving sound it makes when it remembers you rise early. By late afternoon, a car rolled up the lane. Doors thumped. Silence argued with gravel and lost. Mom stepped out first, then Dad, then Ryan, my brother, hands jammed in pockets, looking 17 again and stunned by it. They paused at the fence like people unsure of borders. I wiped my palms on a rag and met them halfway. No speeches on the porch. Grandpa's rule. Mom held a sandwich bag under her arm like a treaty and lifted a photo free. Glossy, gone, matte with years. Grandpa, younger and unbent, stood in work pants with me on his shoulders, my hands in his hair like reins. The barn behind us wore a fresh coat of red nobody had scuffed yet. "You were 3, she said, a smile hitching. "He said you'd boss the wind." I took the picture and felt the weight of my own small hands in a room that didn't exist anymore. "He taught me which kind," I said. Ryan cleared his throat, boot toe tracing a nervous half circle in the dirt. "Saw the news," he muttered. "Judge said what he said." "He read the ledger," I said. "It was due." Dad came last, slower, eyes taking inventory the way men do when pride has finally learned to be quiet. He looked at the fence splices, the straight run of wire, the porch rail that didn't talk back. He took something from his jacket pocket and turned it in his hand. An old leather case, edges cracked, flap stitched twice. "Found this in the attic," he said, voice steady and smaller. "Your grandfather's surveyor's compass. For the fields, not the mantle kind." He placed it in my palm like a transfer of command. The leather smelled like attic dust and all the summers we wasted in arguments. Inside, the brass circle had a longer needle and a case scratched into a constellation different from mine. "You're stubborn," he added. "Eyes on the horizon instead of me." "Like him. But you did good." Tap. The moment knocked anyway. Inside the ribs, where course corrections live. I closed my fingers around the case and didn't correct the grammar of grace. We worked instead. That was the language we all still spoke. Dad held the ladder while I set a new porch light. Ryan fetched socket sets and learned the difference between snug and stripped. Mom scrubbed the kitchen window until the fields looked like a painting someone had finally dusted. Nobody asked for coffee. I made it anyway, and we stood under the eaves, mugs warming our hands, watching a curtain of rain smudge the line of trees and then pull back like it had changed its mind. Mini turn? The pump hiccuped. A sulky little bark. Dad and I lifted the hatch in unison and looked down into the box, two heads bent over a stubborn gasket. He handed me a wrench without commentary. I broke the seal clean, swapped the part, and tightened to feel, not count. When the pump came back with a confident hum, he nodded once, approval measured in the exact unit we'd both been missing. On the porch, Mom set the photo against the window frame to dry and touched the silver star through my t-shirt like you'd check a heartbeat without making a scene. "I was cruel," she said, soft. "Small ways. I thought I was protecting him from losing you to the sky." "You were protecting yourself from admitting you'd already let go," I said, not unkind. She breathed out. "I'm proud," she said, the word finding its legs. "I should have said it sooner." Ryan leaned against the post, chewing a thumbnail he'd meant to quit years ago. "I didn't know you paid the taxes," he said. I don't know what I figured. I kept the lights on," I said, "so we could have this conversation with the porch lit." Dad watched the road, then the field, then the line where they argued. "Court said what it said," he murmured. "I won't appeal." He shifted, as if a weight had climbed off him and didn't know where to sit now. "If you want a hand with the outbuilding roof, 1500 Saturday," I said. "Bring your old gauges." He almost smiled. "Kept them clean." "So did I said, and he understood exactly what I meant. We drifted into the kitchen. The binder lay open on the table, Grandpa's signature steady as an oak. I slid the surveyor's compass case beside the old brass pocket one. 2 circles, 2 needles, north twice confirmed. The flag in the front room held its crease. Evening light washed the walls in a color we could agree on. When they left, they didn't slam the screen. The porch light burned just bright enough to make the steps honest. I stood with the door half open, listening to the car fade into a quiet that didn't feel like exile anymore. The farmhouse breathed. The compass needles held. Out back, rain left a silver edge on the fence wire. I ran my hand along a post, felt the grain rise, and thought about the gymnasium I'd speak in next week. The faces of kids who hadn't yet learned how heavy other people's expectations can be. I'd take the surveyor's compass with me. I'd set it on the lectern and let the needle do what it does without a word. The porch light stayed on, not as a beacon, as a promise. We'd found the door again, and this time it opened both ways. Veterans Week smelled like floor wax and microphone dust. The high school gym buzzed until the principal's hand found the volume slider of the room. I set Grandpa's surveyor's compass on the lectern, brass face scratched into a private constellation, and felt my dress uniform settle at the shoulders like a hand I trusted. The flag behind the bleachers held its crease. The students' banners drooped in obedient rows. Tap. The compass needle made its quiet argument with the earth and won. I didn't give them a movie. I gave them a map. I told them about a farmhouse that needed taxes paid before winter, a courtroom where silence weighed more than speeches, a judge who understood that gallantry isn't theater. A father who learned to hold a ladder instead of a grudge. I told them the only line that matters when noise gets loud: follow the thing that doesn't bargain. Halfway through, a kid in a hoodie stood and forgot to sit again. Then a teacher by the door. Then the JV team along the baseline. Stand moved along the bleachers like truth finding its feet. No applause, just alignment. The gym took a breath and gave it back steady. After, in the hall that smelled like raincoats and pencil shavings, they handed me posters and questions. "Were you scared?" one girl asked, eyes on the ribbon at my chest. "Yes," I said. "Bravery's the work you do anyway." A boy touched the compass with one finger, reverent as if north might rub off. "Does it ever change?" he whispered. "Not this part," I said. That night, the farmhouse hummed the domestic music I'd earned. Kettle hiss, screen door spring, a pump with the right kind of confidence. The porch light glowed a clean circle on the steps. Mom's photo of Grandpa with me on his shoulders dried flat in the window. Dad's old gauges sat on the table, wiped down to a stubborn shine. Ryan texted a blurry picture of the fence line and a single word: straight. I took the small brass compass, mine, and the leather-cased surveyor's, his, and set them side by side. 2 needles agreed without discussion. I carved the words into a cedar plaque on the workbench, shaving sweet as memory curling off the blade. Honor is the only direction that never changes. I hung it above the door, where the light catches it first. Before bed, I stepped onto the porch. The flag by the beam kept its crease. The lane held the day's last shine. I tapped the compass in my pocket twice. Tap, tap, and felt the door behind me stay open. Not as weakness, but as promise. I hadn't come back to win a fight. I'd come back to tell the truth and make room for forgiveness. If you believe silence and dignity can heal families, subscribe for stories about honor, courage, and the quiet road back.